Hello, and welcome back to the Sable International Citizenship Podcast. My name is Shannon, and I'm here with Michelle Patel, Director of our Immigration and Citizenship Division. British citizenship is a fascinating topic. There are all kinds of common and uncommon routes with strict deadlines in terms of an application age. This is why we introduced the 7-part series where Michelle and I will explain in detail all the routes to British citizenship for children under 18. In the first episode of the series, we spoke about British citizenship through descent. In this episode, however, we'll be focusing primarily on British citizenship through double descent for children under 18. You can find a transcript and the episode show notes on our website, www.sableinternational.com. Michelle, how are you doing? Any news in the immigration or nationality realm that you wish to share before we begin?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Thank you so much. It's nice to be back for the second episode. Yeah, so in terms of the news, yeah, the week's been kind of hectic. Got a few things, one or two things to share. What I think the most pertinent one for listeners is the new ETA, or the electronic sort of visa that the UK want to introduce. So we'll be definitely doing a piece that you'll soon find on our website and our blogs on the new ETA visa, which is a 2-year visit visa for non-visa nationals. So that might appeal to some of our listeners. And also, what the Home Office have gone ahead and done is issued a new guidance on those who can't come into UK because their biometrics. So they've applied for their visa, but their biometrics keep on getting delayed. But they need to start a job, or they need to come in and become a full-time pupil at a university or studies. So there's been a bit of an issue with enrolling people's biometrics. So a lot of listeners may be in a current position where they're getting a little bit frustrated on waiting for the biometrics to be done, or invited to book their biometrics or find a date, which then usually marks the beginning of their visa process. So if you are someone that's listening to it, there is new guidance on how one can remedy that situation. And the Home Office will release that, and hopefully we will be also setting out some of our summarization on how about you go finding the guidance and who it affects. So look out for that.
So, coming back to double descent, how is this different than claiming citizenship by descent, for example?
Great question. It is quite different because usually when you're claiming citizenship by descent from a parent, Shannon, it's where the parent's born in the UK or the parent naturalized in the UK, and then you just happen to be that first generation born out of the UK. So very straightforward as compared to double descent. And in a double descent scenario, what we dub as double descent, as an easier way to explain, is where actually the parent themselves are also born out of the UK and acquired their own citizenship through their father or mother. So usually in a scenario like this, you have the child born, let's say in South Africa in 2006, their parents born in the 1970s in South Africa, with the grandparent born in the UK. How can this child claim citizenship automatically through their parent, even though the parent themselves are British, usually what they classify as by descent? So that's where the UK usually have a stance where the answer is no. But we know at Sable that there are certain interpretations that allow us, where applicable, to claim citizenship for that child by double descent. So through the grandparent to the parent, and from the parent to the child, but obviously originating from that UK-born grandparent, or indeed a grandparent born in a previous UK colony, perhaps.
Can you briefly describe certain routes by double descent with examples of past cases?
Of course, Shannon. Yeah. So I think that would be quite helpful for the listeners as well, this podcast. So let's start off with the most common one that we see, or I've seen in my time having the road shows in South Africa. So the most common one that I've seen where it's a double descent is actually an automatic claim through a parent who's been registered through their UK born mom. So let me expand on that. So parents who were born in, say, South Africa before 1983 couldn't claim citizenship through their UK-born moms. The law was quite gender discriminatory. It wouldn't allow citizenship to flow from a mother born in the UK to a child born before 1983 out of the UK. However, in 1979, the UK then tried to correct that wrong and asked, or told their British posts abroad, that you can register such children whilst minors as British citizens, or at that point, what used to be called citizenship of the United Kingdom and colonies. So if I was someone born, let's say, in 1979 in South Africa to a mother born in the UK, I would be registered under Section 7 of the law that was prevailing at that point. Now, what that means is, in the modern day, that parent has a full British passport, having been registered through their mom before 1983. So if you are a listener and you are someone that has a British passport, but you know you have this really odd looking document that gave you your citizenship and it was issued to you before 1983, and your mother was born in the UK, chances are you have been registered under what they used to call Section 7 of the older British Nationality Act 1948. Now, in the modern day, Shannon, what that means is, through a specific interpretation that Sable has been able to confirm with the Passport Office, that citizenship passes on one further generation born out to the UK to children born after the 1st of January 1983 onwards. So, in other words, in terms of a family tree, if you, let's say your child was born in 1995 and you, the father, were born in South Africa before 1983 and you have been registered in this fashion before 1983 yourself, your child is British by descent and has always been British. So often when I see people and they present to me their certificates and I go, this is a good one, because this means that any children born to you, including obviously your children now, are British citizens and should and have been British citizens since day one, and should just go out and apply for their British passport. So again, just to stress, if your parent is British, not born in the UK, but has a British passport, and you suspect you got it through your mom or you've been registered before 1983, then this could be applicable to your children, even if they're over 18 now, because there's no deadline for that. So that's number one, Shannon. That's the one I see most common. The most other, the other common, well, not so common, but often we see it recurring every 2, 3 weeks. We'll get an inquiry on it. Is Crown Service. So again, this is an interpretation that allows a British parent who themselves is classified as by descent, because they're born in South Africa, for example, with a father born in the UK. But it allows that parent to automatically pass on citizenship to a further generation born out of the UK. So that means, any children after 1st of January 1983, in other words, born in South Africa. Now, Crown Service is basically, in a South African aspect of things, I've seen the most common one there being the British South African police, for example. Okay, because what happens is most UK-born grandfathers went over to Southern Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe or South Africa, to join the efforts down there, and some of them were police officers. So, in a very basic example, if your father was such a person at the time that you were born in South Africa, then chances are that, as even though you claimed your nationality from your UK-born father, you can pass it on a further generation born out to the UK through the Crown Service element. Because what Sable's been able to do over the last, sort of almost 6 to 7 years in negotiating with the Passport Office is convince them that something like the British South African Police or Service performed in that force does count towards Crown Service. A lot of people are under the wrong impression that Crown Service is army service only for the UK government, but not necessarily. Includes, teachers, civil officers, and so on. So those are two main examples. So again, if you're a listener and you're a parent and you have a British passport, but you know your dad was in the British South African Police or he was working for the UK government in some aspect when you were born, then chances are that you're not just British by descent, but you're British in such a manner that you have always had the right to pass it on to your children. And children born to you are probably British now, and you should get that looked at.
So, Michelle, tell me, do double descent claims always result in application for British passports, or can they also result in applications for British citizenship?
That's actually quite a good question. Yeah. Yeah. Often I think people have the misunderstanding that applications for British citizenship is always straight away applying for a British passport, but that's only applicable where you are able to convince the passport office or His Majesty's Passport Office that the child is already British and always has been, which as I've explained in the last two examples, does result in that being the case, but not always the case, of course. So the straight answer to your question is not necessarily. Sometimes double descent claims do lead to an option to register the child as a British citizen because they're not already British, and then use that registration certificate to then apply for the child's first British passport. Now, that is when age becomes an issue. So, in other words, there is a limit, which is the 18th birthday, in terms of when the application needs to be submitted. And in a practical sense, the most common way where a double descent claim would first need to go through a registration process, which is a formal way to acquire British citizenship, and it's by application to the Home Office in the UK, or rather than the Passport Office. They're two separate entities in the UK. Okay, one grants passports, one grants nationality. So one of the most common ways where double descent claims have led to a registration option is where you have a grandparent, say, born in the UK, or sometimes even in an overseas colony. The parent also born outside the UK, British by descent. None of the other two exemptions that I mentioned earlier apply. So the parent is British by descent, so can't automatically pass their nationality to a further generation born out of the UK. But the parent has lived in the UK for 3 years continuously with no more than 270 days out before the child's birth. Doesn't matter whether they had a valid British passport whilst they were in the UK, but the fact is that they're British by descent at the time the child was born. The child is still under 18. The relevant British parent has lived in the UK for any 3 years with no more than 270 days out. And the relevant parent's parent, so this is the grandparent, was British otherwise than by descent, which usually is the case because they're born in the UK, the relevant grandparent of the child who is the main applicant here. So in such a scenario, we're able to register the child without the child having to come to the UK or the family. So while the child is living in South Africa, we can make an online application to register the child as a British citizen using the parent's British nationality status and previous UK residency. So great question, because a lot of our listeners could have children who are 17, 16, turning 18 very soon. A lot of our listeners are British parents who themselves are born out of the UK. And a lot of our listeners, hopefully, who are British parents and have the children in the right age, have spent some 3 years in the UK. And it can be any 3 year period as long as it's before the child's birth. If you are someone that falls into that sort of realm or these sort of requirements, please contact us before it's too late. Because once a child is 18, we can't make an application. So thank you for asking that question, Shannon. That's actually quite a good question.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you for your time, and thank you
Pleasure.
to everyone who tuned in today. I hope you will all join us for our next episode. In this podcast series, we will be talking about the complex route to British citizenship by triple descent for children.
Thank you so
See you
much.
all then.